She'd always felt like a shadow. In every room she entered, it was as if the world continued without noticing her presence. At work, her ideas were quietly brushed aside. Her questions went unanswered, and her efforts were acknowledged by only a passing glance. At school, she remembered the feeling of sitting in a corner of the classroom, raising her hand, and still being overlooked. At home, conversations flowed around her like she wasn't even there, as if she existed only in the spaces between other people's lives. The world had not been cruel in an obvious way, but it had been indifferent. And that indifference had a weight that pressed down on her every day. Her life was small, measured in routines and quiet corners. She woke up, went about her tasks, returned home, and retreated into the one place that made her feel alive, the old piano in her room. It was not a grand piano, but a weathered upright with chipped keys and scratches that told stories of years gone by. To anyone else, it might have seemed ordinary, almost forgotten. But to her, it was a secret world. Every key she pressed was a voice she had never been allowed to use. A whisper that carried all the thoughts and feelings she could not express out loud at first. She had only played when no one could hear. She feared that even showing her skill might invite mockery or dismissal as it had once before. She remembered the day clearly sitting at a piano in the living room of a friend's house, excited to share a song she had been working on for weeks. When she played, the room fell quiet, but not in awe. Instead, the group began to whisper, exchange glances, and soon the moment dissolved into polite claps that felt hollow. She had felt her heart sink, a sense of invisibility deepening. From that day on, the piano became a private companion, a place where she could speak without judgment. Nights were the best time. The house would settle into a quiet that wrapped around her like a blanket. She would sit on the worn piano bench, her fingers dancing across the keys, and the world outside seemed to disappear. Notes flowed in a way words never could. Her music carried laughter she had never shared, tears she had never shed, and dreams that had no place in her ordinary life. In those moments, she felt seen by the sound itself, as if the music recognized her existence when no one else did. Yet even within these moments of refuge, a sense of loneliness lingered. She would often stop playing and sit in the silence that followed, listening to her own breathing and wonder if anyone would ever notice her. There were fleeting thoughts of giving up, of retreating completely, but something inside her, fragile yet persistent, would not let her quit. It was not ambition that drove her. It was survival. Music was the only thing that made her feel real. It was the only thing that reminded her she mattered. Her daily life remained a routine of invisibility. At work, she moved through tasks without drawing attention. She took pride in her competence, even if no one else acknowledged it. She helped colleagues quietly solve problems that went unpraised, and learned to measure her own worth without expecting validation. Still, there were moments when the sting of being overlooked cut deeper than she could bear. It could be as small as a coworker taking credit for her suggestion, or as painful as being skipped over in conversations. Her words floating into silence. Friends were few, and she had grown used to that. People often mistook her quiet nature for indifference, not realizing it was a shield built from years of being unseen. She longed for connection, for someone who would look past the surface and see her. But the fear of disappointment kept her careful and reserved. Only the piano knew the depth of her feelings, the intensity of her thoughts, and the longing that simmered beneath her calm exterior. There were other things in her life that mattered. Small joys she allowed herself. She loved the sound of rain on the roof, the way sunlight would fall across her room in the morning, and the smell of old books. But these pleasures, while comforting, were quiet companions. The piano remained the center of her universe. It was more than an instrument. It was a witness to her growth, her struggles, her secret victories. She remembered a day from her childhood, a memory both vivid and bittersweet. She had been around 7 or 8, sitting on the piano bench for the first time, hesitant but curious. Her small fingers had pressed the keys, producing sounds that were uneven and clumsy yet magical to her ears. Her parents, busy and distracted, had barely glanced her way. Still, she had felt a spark of sense that she had discovered something uniquely hers, a language that belonged only to her. That spark had never gone out, even as life pressed down on her with its routine and neglect. Over time, she had taught herself more than just notes and melodies. She had learned to pour emotion into every touch, to make the piano echo feelings that had no words. She would experiment with tempos, dynamics, and rhythms, feeling the music respond to her in ways that people never had. It was a dialogue, intimate and profound, and it sustained her. Without it, the days of being invisible might have crushed her entirely, but she also felt the ache of isolation keenly. Sometimes she would imagine a world where someone would see her, or someone would recognize the depth behind her quiet demeanor. She pictured the expressions on people's faces as they listened to her play, the surprise, and perhaps even admiration. These were dreams she barely allowed herself to entertain, because they seemed fragile and distant, like reflections on water that disappeared with the slightest touch. Even so, she clung to the idea that one day someone might notice. She did not know when or how, but the possibility gave her a quiet hope. It was a hope that made her practice late into the night. Fingers aching, eyes heavy with fatigue, yet heart alert with purpose. Each note was a step toward a world that had not yet acknowledged her. A world that might one day see her as more than a shadow. One evening, after another day of unnoticed efforts at work, she returned home with a heaviness that clung to her shoulders. The apartment was quiet, the air still, and she made her way to the piano with the ritualistic reverence it had earned over the years. She sat down and allowed her fingers to wander across the keys, starting with soft, tentative notes that gradually grew into something more confident and expressive. The music swelled and ebbed, carrying her through memories, frustrations, and small triumphs. In those hours, she felt a freedom she could find nowhere else. A liberation from the weight of being invisible as the night wore on. She paused only occasionally to sip water or stretch, never wanting to break the spell. The music was a lifeline, a bridge to a self that existed beyond the limitations imposed by others. She imagined a world where her music might speak for her, where it might reveal the person she was inside, hidden from everyone else. That thought, while distant, was exhilarating. It reminded her that even if the world ignored her now, she had something it could not take away: her voice through the piano in those quiet moments. She felt a strange combination of sadness and anticipation. The sadness came from years of being overlooked, from the countless times she had been pushed to the background. The anticipation came from the awareness that something within her was growing, something powerful and undeniable. It was not a desire for fame or attention, but a yearning to exist fully, to be acknowledged in a way that went beyond words. By the time the clock struck midnight, she would finally lean back, fingers tired but heart alive. She would sit in the stillness of her apartment, letting the echoes of the music linger, feeling the sense of being truly herself, even if only for a few hours. She would whisper to herself that tomorrow might bring another day of being invisible. But the piano would always be there, a faithful companion and a mirror to her soul. And so, she continued day after day, evening after evening, caught between the quiet struggles of her ordinary life and the extraordinary world she could create with her music. Each note was a statement, each melody a testament to her existence. She was invisible in the eyes of the world, yes, but she was alive and within the music. She was unforgettable. Days passed in the same quiet rhythm, but something was beginning to shift inside her. The piano, always her refuge, was now a companion that seemed to understand her more than anyone else. She spent hours experimenting, trying to create sounds that reflected not just her sadness, but also her small sparks of hope. She wanted her music to be alive, to carry the complexity of her feelings, sometimes fragile, sometimes fierce. Each note she played felt like a message she could not speak aloud, confession that was safe only in the language of music. The outside world continued its usual indifference. She walked through the city streets, unnoticed by the crowds that passed her, each person immersed in their own lives. Work remained a place of quiet frustration. She suggested ideas that were never acknowledged and watched as others took credit for solutions she had quietly implemented. It hurt, yes, but she had learned to carry her disappointment inward. Storing it in the small pockets of silence she had mastered, her solace was always waiting at home, the piano ready to receive her emotions and transform them into something beautiful. One evening, she found herself wandering into a small community center she had passed countless times but never entered. A poster on the wall advertised an open piano session, inviting anyone who wished to play. For a long moment, she hesitated at the door, her heart pounding. The idea of being in a room full of strangers, of actually letting someone hear her play, terrified her. She was so used to anonymity that the thought of attention, even fleeting, made her stomach twist with nerves. Still, there was a quiet pull. A voice inside her saying that maybe this was the chance she had been waiting for. Inside, the room was modest but warm. A few people were scattered around, talking softly or watching others practice. At the far corner stood a grand piano, polished and gleaming, and she felt an odd mixture of excitement and fear. She approached cautiously, unsure if she had the courage to play. But something about the presence of other people, the idea that someone might actually hear her, stirred something deep within. She took a deep breath, settled her fingers on the keys, and began. The first notes were tentative, almost unsure, as if testing the waters of this new experience. But as she continued, the music began to flow, steady and expressive. Each key seemed to carry her emotions outward, and she realized that the room had quieted. People had noticed, some stepping closer, some simply listening from their corners. She played longer than she had planned, lost in the rhythm of expression. It was strange and beautiful to feel the presence of others, not as a threat, but as a witness to the music she had nurtured in solitude. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like if her music could reach more people. What if they could see her, really see her, through the language of her piano? The thought was intoxicating but quickly replaced by doubt. She was a stranger here after all. Who would care about her music? Who would care about her at all? Yet the sound she created seemed to answer some of those questions. For the first time, she felt that perhaps her talent was not just hers to keep hidden in the shadows. Returning home later that night, she could not stop thinking about the experience. The piano in her apartment felt different somehow, less like a secret and more like a bridge between her world and the outside. She spent hours exploring new melodies, inspired by the possibility that one day, someone might actually listen and feel what she felt. She began to understand that music had a way of reaching people even when words failed. And that thought sparked a small but persistent hope within her. Days turned into weeks, and she started to allow herself small experiments with performance. Not in public, but for the few moments when someone might be present in her home, a neighbor, stopping by, a friend visiting. She would play with intention, letting the music express emotions she had never shared before. And though no one had yet recognized her genius, she began to notice a change in herself. She was no longer simply surviving the world. She was creating, speaking, and claiming a part of her existence that was undeniable. Work continued to be a challenge. Her ideas still went unrecognized, and the feeling of being invisible persisted, but it no longer defined her entirely. She carried the confidence of her music with her, a quiet strength that reminded her that she had value, even if others refused to see it. She realized that recognition was not the only measure of worth. Her own awareness of her skills and her dedication was enough to sustain her spirit. One day, she was asked to help organize a small office event, a casual gathering where employees could share hobbies and talents. Her first instinct was to decline, as she always had, fearing the scrutiny and potential embarrassment. But something had changed inside her. The pull to finally share a piece of herself, even in such a small setting, was stronger than her fear. She hesitated only briefly before agreeing. She told herself it would be a small thing, a simple song, nothing grand. But she knew, deep down, it was the first step out of her shadow. The day of the gathering arrived, and she set up in a quiet corner of the room. People chatted and laughed around her, mostly unaware of what she was about to do. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting her fingers rest lightly on the keys, feeling the piano beneath them. Then she began to play. At first, the sound was soft, almost hesitant, but soon it grew in confidence. The music filled the room in a way she had never imagined, carrying her emotions, her story, and her presence into the air. Some people paused mid-conversation, drawn to the unexpected sound. They did not know her well, but they were captivated by the depth and beauty of her playing. For the first time, she experienced what it felt like to be noticed, not for her appearance or her words, but for the essence of who she was. It was intoxicating and terrifying at once. The music seemed to lift her out of the world she had known, even for a brief moment, and place her somewhere new, somewhere visible. When she finished, the room held a silence that felt heavy and full. Then, a few people clapped, soft but genuine. She looked up, surprised to see some faces glowing with admiration. The recognition was small, but it was enough. Enough to make her heart swell and her spirit lift. She realized that her music could touch others in ways she had only dreamed of, and that her years of practice, isolation, and perseverance had prepared her for this moment. After that day, she began to see her music in a new light. It was no longer just an escape. It was a bridge, a way to connect with the world that had always ignored her. She started to plan small performances, always hesitant but increasingly bold. Each experience built her confidence, and with each note played in front of someone else, she felt herself moving further from the shadows and closer to a presence that could not be ignored. At home, she continued to pour her soul into the piano, exploring new compositions and techniques. The music became a living record of her growth, a testimony to the courage it took to step out of invisibility. Sometimes she played late into the night, lost in the creation. Other times she played for someone, seeing the subtle shifts in their expressions as they listened. These moments, however brief, were transformative. She discovered that her talent could create a ripple in the world, a ripple that had the power to rewrite how others saw her. Despite these small successes, she remained cautious. The fear of being overlooked, of returning to invisibility, never fully disappeared. But the piano had given her something more valuable than recognition, a sense of self. She knew that even if the world ignored her again, the music would always remember her, honor her, and reflect the person she was becoming. Through these experiences, she began to understand a deeper truth. Talent alone was not enough. It was the courage to share it that made a difference. She realized that her music was not just about playing notes perfectly, but about conveying emotion, connecting with listeners, and daring to exist fully. Each performance, each moment of risk, became a step in reclaiming a place in the world that had long denied her presence. By the end of the second part of her journey, she felt a quiet but undeniable transformation. She was still shy, still careful, and still navigating a world that often failed to notice her. But she had discovered a power within herself, a voice through the piano that could speak when words failed, a presence that could make the invisible visible. And as she sat at her piano each night, letting her fingers dance across the keys, she began to understand that this was only the beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready to meet it. One note at a time. The moment she first played in front of others had changed something inside her. It was not a complete transformation. She was still careful, still wary of drawing too much attention, but it gave her a glimpse of what was possible. The memory of those quiet, astonished faces lingered in her mind. A reminder that her music could reach people in a way her words never could. That small office gathering had been enough to awaken a courage she had never fully allowed herself to feel. In the following weeks, she found herself thinking more about what it would mean to perform in a larger space. For more people, where the stakes were higher. The thought frightened her, but it also carried a strange excitement. She began seeking out opportunities, small at first. A community gathering, casual cafe event, a local charity meeting. Each time her hands trembled as she approached the piano. But she found that once the first notes left her fingers, the fear melted into music. The sound carried her forward, and the audience, however small, became witnesses to a part of her that had always been hidden. She remembered one particular evening. When she was invited to play at a small local cafe, the room was dimly lit, filled with the soft murmur of conversation and the occasional clink of cups. She sat at the piano, a little distant from the crowd, and for a moment felt herself shrink, wishing to disappear. But as her fingers touched the keys, the sound filled the space with warmth and emotion. Slowly, people turned toward her, their chatter fading into attentive silence. Some closed their eyes, letting the music move them, while others leaned forward as if trying to catch every note. For the first time, she noticed something she had never experienced before. People were not just hearing the music. They were feeling it. She could see it in their expressions, in the way their bodies relaxed, in the small smiles that appeared as she played. It was an odd mixture of vulnerability and exhilaration. She was sharing a part of herself that had been hidden for so long, and the world, for a few moments, truly noticed her. She realized then that she had the power to connect with others without words, to create a shared experience through her music. As her confidence grew, so did her experimentation. She began to explore more complex pieces that demanded both technical skill and emotional depth. She pushed herself to convey stories, feelings, and images through the piano, letting each performance become a reflection of her inner life. The process was not easy. There were nights of frustration when her fingers refused to cooperate, and the melodies she imagined in her mind did not translate to the keys. But even those nights carried lessons, teaching her patience, resilience, and the importance of persistence. One day, she was approached by a small group organizing a charity concert. They had heard about her performances at local events and invited her to play in front of a larger audience, one that included people she had never met. Her heart pounded at the idea. This was no casual gathering. This was a real audience, real expectations, and the chance for something extraordinary to happen. She hesitated, fearing rejection or failure, but something inside urged her to say yes. She told herself it was only a chance, a step towards seeing if her music could truly reach beyond the corners of her hidden world. The day of the concert arrived, and she stood backstage, her fingers lightly brushing the piano keys, trying to steady the nervous rhythm of her heart. The room was filled with strangers, and the weight of the moment pressed on her like never before. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and reminded herself of all the nights she had spent alone with her piano. All the hours of practice, all the emotion she had poured into each note. This was not about perfection. It was about truth, about letting the music speak when words could not. When she began to play, the room fell into silence. The first notes were tentative, cautious, but soon they transformed into something powerful and expressive. Every melody carried her story, the years of being overlooked, the quiet moments of self-discovery, the long nights spent in practice. The audience, initially unsure, began to respond. They leaned in, some closing their eyes, others watching intently. She could feel the energy of the room, the way her music reached them, connected them, and for the first time, she felt truly present in the world outside her small, private space. There was a moment in the performance when her fingers danced across the keys in a way that surprised even her. The music swelled, carried by emotion, and it seemed to lift the room along with it. She realized then that she was no longer invisible. She was seen not in the superficial sense, but in a profound way that touched the hearts of those listening. The fear that had always accompanied her vanished, replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose. She was giving a part of herself, and the world was receiving it. After the performance, people approached her, offering words of admiration and gratitude. Some were moved to tears. Others spoke of feeling a deep sense of connection to the music. She listened, still somewhat in disbelief, realizing that for the first time, her presence mattered. She had stepped out of invisibility and into a space where her talent and emotion could resonate with others. It was a moment she would never forget, a turning point in the journey she had only just begun. In the days that followed, the experience stayed with her. She returned to her apartment, sat at her piano, and reflected on what had happened. She realized that the fear that had long held her back was not as powerful as she had imagined. The courage to play, to be vulnerable, had unlocked something within her. She began to understand that her music was not just a private refuge, was a bridge, a way to communicate, to be recognized, and to touch the lives of others. Her perspective on life began to shift. She still experienced moments of invisibility at work and in daily interactions, but she no longer allowed them to define her. She had discovered a space where she mattered, where her voice through music was undeniable. Each time she played, she carried the memory of that concert, the feeling of being seen, and it fueled her dedication and creativity. She also learned the importance of risk. Playing for others required vulnerability, and vulnerability was uncomfortable, even frightening. But she realized that without risk, there could be no transformation. Each new performance was a chance to grow, to learn, and to reach people in ways that words alone could never achieve. She embraced the discomfort, understanding that it was a necessary part of the journey from invisibility to presence. In addition to technical growth, she discovered a new emotional depth in her music. She began to experiment with improvisation, letting her feelings guide the notes rather than strictly following written compositions. This allowed her to express herself more freely, to communicate directly from her heart to the audience. People responded, sometimes with surprise, sometimes with quiet appreciation, but always with attention. It was a revelation. Music could carry not only skill but also soul through these experiences. She noticed changes in herself outside the piano as well. She walked with a slightly taller posture, spoke with more confidence in small interactions, and began to take small initiatives at work. The music had given her a foundation of self-respect and courage that extended into all areas of life. She was still cautious, still careful not to overstep in a world that often ignored her. But the quiet strength she had cultivated through music was now a guiding force. There were still nights of doubt and moments of insecurity, but they no longer paralyzed her. She had discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Each performance, each expression of her talent, reinforced that lesson. The piano was not just an instrument. It was a teacher, guiding her through the complexities of emotion, risk, and self-expression. As the third part of her journey unfolded, she began to recognize that her music had the power to transform not only her own life, but also the lives of those who listened. It was a quiet revolution, subtle but profound. The girl who had once felt invisible was becoming someone unforgettable. Not through grand gestures or loud proclamations, but through the authenticity and depth of her art. Each note played was a step further from shadows, a step closer to a world where she could be recognized and valued. By the end of this chapter of her story, she had moved from private practice to public presence, from hidden talent to recognized skill. She understood that the journey was ongoing, that challenges would continue to arise, and that fear would occasionally return. But she had learned the power of music, the strength of courage, and the importance of showing up fully. She was no longer invisible, and the world had begun to take notice. And with that realization came a quiet but unstoppable determination to continue, to grow, and to let her music rewrite her fate. Her growing confidence brought with it a new awareness of the world around her. She began to see that people's reactions to her music were not just about admiration. They were a recognition of her very presence. It was a startling revelation, one she had never expected. She had spent so long being invisible that the idea of someone noticing her for who she truly was felt almost unbelievable. Yet as her performances continued, the acknowledgement she received became undeniable, and slowly, she started to feel the world was opening up to her. Opportunities started appearing in ways she had never imagined. Invitations to perform at local events, small charity gatherings, and community celebrations began to arrive. Some were informal, casual requests, while others carried a sense of expectation. Each opportunity presented a new challenge, and with it, a mixture of excitement and fear. She still struggled with self-doubt, questioning whether she was truly ready or capable. But each time she sat at the piano, the music reminded her of her own strength, and she learned to trust in it. One day she received an invitation to perform at a larger event, a regional gathering that included people from different towns. The event promised a more formal setting, with a bigger audience and higher stakes. Her first reaction was hesitation. The thought of playing for so many people at once was intimidating, and the fear of failure loomed large. Yet beneath the anxiety, there was a spark of anticipation. She had come this far, and she felt that this could be a turning point in her journey. After a few days of contemplation, she accepted, promising herself that she would give her best no matter what. Preparation for the event consumed her thoughts. She spent countless hours at her piano, refining pieces she had been working on for months, practicing until every note felt like a part of her. She experimented with new melodies, allowing her emotions to guide her improvisations. The piano became both a sanctuary and a workshop, a place where she could shape her music into something that could communicate beyond words. Nights passed in a blur of sound and concentration, but each hour deepened her connection to her craft. The day of the performance arrived, and she arrived early, taking in the sight of the stage and the audience seats. The room was larger than any she had played in before, with rows of chairs stretching far back, filled with people who would soon hear her music. She felt a surge of nerves, but also a quiet determination. She reminded herself of all the hours spent in private practice, the nights of frustration, and the small victories that had led her here. This was her moment to step fully into the light. When she began to play, the first notes were cautious, tentative, but as she settled into the rhythm, the music grew stronger, more confident. Each piece she played carried layers of her story, the quiet struggles, the lonely nights, the persistent hope, and the joy she had found in her art. The audience responded instinctively. Some leaned forward, captivated, while others closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. It was a shared experience, a moment of connection that transcended words. For the first time, she noticed the subtle but profound ways music could impact people. She could feel the energy of the room shift, notice the slight movements of heads and hands in appreciation. There were moments when she caught glimpses of people being moved to tears, and the realization struck her that her music could touch lives in a deep and meaningful way. It was no longer just about being seen. It was about reaching others, creating an emotional bridge that connected her to the world outside her room. After the performance, she was approached by several people who wanted to express their admiration. Some spoke of feeling inspired, others shared personal stories of how her music had resonated with them. The experience was overwhelming, yet invigorating. She had longed for recognition, but this was different. It was not superficial praise, but an acknowledgement of her essence, of the depth and sincerity she poured into her music. She realized then that her art had the power to leave an imprint, to create moments of remembrance, to be a part of something larger than herself. With each new performance, her confidence grew. She no longer shied away from opportunities that challenged her. She began to see that visibility was not something to fear, but a space to inhabit with authenticity. She became more aware of how her presence affected others, learning to gauge the energy of an audience and respond in kind. The piano had taught her more than music kit, had taught her resilience, empathy, and the courage to step forward even when fear lingered. She also discovered the delicate balance between recognition and humility. While attention could be exhilarating, she remained grounded in the knowledge that her true value was not measured by applause or accolades. It was in the music itself, in the moments when her emotions flowed through the keys, that she felt the deepest sense of fulfillment. Each performance was a reminder that she was worthy, not because others noticed her, but because she had nurtured her talent, honed her craft, and remained true to herself. Life outside the piano began to shift as well. Her relationships at work improved subtly. Colleagues who had once ignored her now approached her with curiosity and interest. While some recognition was external, much of the change came from within. She walked taller, spoke with a steadier voice, and carried herself with a quiet confidence that had previously been absent. People began to notice not just her music, but the person behind it, a woman who had persevered, grown, and discovered her own strength. Despite the growing attention, she remained cautious. She understood that fame or recognition could be fleeting, and she did not want to rely on external validation. Instead, she focused on the essence of her music, the joy and freedom it brought her, and the connections it could forge with others. She continued to explore new compositions, refine old ones, and experiment with improvisation. Her art was evolving, becoming richer, deeper, and more expressive with each passing day. Through these experiences, she learned the value of persistence. There were moments of doubt, nights when the music felt flat or uninspired, and days when the world seemed indifferent again. But she had learned that these challenges were part of the journey. Every setback, every moment of uncertainty, strengthened her resolve and deepened her understanding of herself and her craft. The piano had become a teacher, guiding her not only in music but in life, helping her navigate fear, self-doubt, and the complex path of growth. As the fourth part of her journey unfolded, she began to recognize that her story was not just about her own transformation. It was also about the impact she could have on others, the way her music could inspire, comfort, and connect. She began to see herself as part of a larger tapestry, a participant in a world where art had the power to change hearts and minds. Each performance was a contribution, a thread woven into the shared human experience. And she embraced the responsibility with humility and care. By the end of this chapter, she had reached a new level of self-awareness. She was no longer the invisible girl who hid in corners and feared attention. She had learned to step forward, to share her talent, and to trust in her own voice. She understood that recognition was not an end in itself, but a reflection of the courage and dedication that had brought her here. She had become visible, not just to the world, but to herself, and in that visibility, she found a profound sense of purpose as she sat at her piano each night. Practicing, composing, and reflecting, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The journey was far from over, and challenges would continue to arise. But she had discovered the power of her own presence, the impact of her music, and the courage to face the unknown. She had moved from invisibility to acknowledgement, from fear to confidence, and from uncertainty to a growing understanding of her own potential. And with that understanding, she knew that the next step of her journey awaited, a step that would continue to transform her life in ways she had only begun to imagine. She had come a long way since the days of being invisible. The shy, quiet girl who spent hours alone with her piano had transformed into a woman whose presence could no longer be ignored. Yet the journey was not just about recognition or applause. It was about understanding her own worth, embracing her talent fully, and allowing her music to carry the stories she had long kept to herself. The culmination of her journey brought her to a grand performance, an event that attracted a larger audience than she had ever faced before. She arrived early, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nerves. She took in the venue, the rows of seats stretching back, the lights that would shine on her, the anticipation of an audience waiting for her music. It was overwhelming, yet she felt a deep sense of readiness. This was not a moment to impress, but a moment to express, to let her music speak for her in the way words never could. As she sat at the piano, she took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered every step of her journey, the lonely nights, the secret practice, the small performances that built her courage, and the moments when her music had touched the hearts of others. All of it had led to this moment. She let her fingers rest lightly on the keys, feeling the familiar texture, the weight and responsiveness that had been her companion through so many years. When she began to play, the room fell silent. The first notes were soft, tentative, but they quickly grew in strength and emotion. She allowed herself to be completely present, each movement of her fingers a reflection of her heart, her struggles, and her triumphs. The music was no longer just a private escape. It was a dialogue with the audience, a bridge connecting her inner world with theirs. Every note she played carried a piece of her story. Every melody spoke of a journey from invisibility to presence. The audience responded in ways that took her breath away. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, while others leaned forward, absorbed in the depth of her performance. She could sense the energy of the room shifting, the connection growing stronger with every passing moment. It was a shared experience, one where silence and sound intertwined to create something profound. For the first time, she felt the true power of her music, not as a tool for personal refuge, but as a force that could touch and inspire others. In that moment, she realized that her journey had been about more than being seen. It had been about discovering the courage to show up fully, to embrace her gifts, and to trust in her own voice. Recognition from others was meaningful, yes, but it was secondary to the understanding she had gained that her presence mattered, her art mattered, and her story was worthy of being told. The music had given her this clarity, and in that clarity, found an inner peace that had long eluded her. After the performance, she was met with applause, genuine and heartfelt. People approached her, expressing how her music had moved them, inspired them, and touched something deep within their own hearts. Some spoke of personal struggles, of moments when her melodies had resonated with their own emotions. She listened, overwhelmed but grateful, understanding for the first time the ripple effect of her art. Her music had created a shared human experience, connecting lives in a way that words alone could not. As she walked away from the stage, she felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond the moment. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the years of practice and solitude, the initial hesitation to share her talent, the gradual steps into public performance, and the growing confidence that had allowed her to embrace visibility. Each experience had shaped her, each challenge had strengthened her, and each note had carried her closer to the person she was meant to become. In the days following the performance, she continued to receive invitations to play at various events. But more importantly, she carried with her a newfound sense of self-assurance. She understood that her value was not dependent on the number of people who noticed her, but on the authenticity with which she expressed herself. She continued to practice, compose, and perform, not for external validation, but because it was an essential part of who she was. The piano was no longer just a refuge, it was an extension of herself, a voice that could communicate the depths of her heart. Her life outside music also began to change. The quiet confidence she had cultivated through her performances started to influence her interactions in everyday life. She spoke with clarity, made decisions with assurance, and no longer allowed the fear of invisibility to dictate her choices. People around her began to notice the shift. Colleagues sought her input, friends valued her perspectives, strangers responded to her presence with warmth and respect. The transformation was not just external, it was deeply internal, rooted in the realization that she had always possessed the strength and talent to make herself seen. She also began mentoring others, recognizing the power of encouragement and guidance. Young musicians who were hesitant or insecure found inspiration in her story, and she took joy in helping them discover their own voices. In guiding others, she deepened her understanding of the responsibility that comes with talent, the responsibility to share, to nurture, and to create opportunities for others to shine. She realized that visibility was not just about personal recognition, but about lifting others and contributing to a broader community of creativity and expression. Despite her growing recognition, she remained humble. She knew that success was not a destination, but a continuous journey. Each performance, each new composition, each audience encounter was part of an ongoing process of growth and self-discovery. She embraced the uncertainty and challenges that came with her path. Her music had taught her patience, resilience, and the importance of embracing both triumphs and setbacks with grace. Through all of this, she never lost sight of the private moments that had shaped her. The hours spent alone at her piano, the nights of quiet reflection, and the early experiences of feeling invisible were all part of the foundation that supported her growth. She honored those experiences, recognizing that they had given her the sensitivity, empathy, and emotional depth that made her performances so compelling. The piano had been a faithful companion, witnessing her struggles and triumphs, and it continued to be the center of her creative life.